Thank you, member. Recognize the member for Oak Bay, Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And please let me start by congratulating the new leader of the official opposition who just spoke to the throne speech a few minutes ago. I recognize that it's a lot of work going through a leadership campaign, particularly one that was frankly quite interesting and quite well contested. So congratulations to the leader, and I look forward to months of working collectively today, particularly on this day, months and years, particularly on this day, Valentine's Day. I'd like to start my response to the speech from the throne also thanking my family, my constituents, and particularly the hard-working staff who I am blessed to be able to work with on a day-to-day basis. Like the leader of the official opposition, I wish to congratulate now publicly whoever wins the by-election today in Kelowna West. An interesting riding that made up of both West Kelowna, West Bank Nation, and large parts of downtown Kelowna. You know, Honourable Speaker, I spent 10 days in Kelowna this last little while, knocking on doors and getting to know the Kelowna residents and the issues there. What was one of my first tasks was to actually go to Ben Stewart's office and say to him, you know, good luck, Ben. We're going to make you work for this one. So I'm excited to see what actually happens today. We know that the turnout is low, and for whatever happens, I'm sure everyone on both sides of this House will welcome the new MLA with open arms and look forward to working with him or her as well in the days ahead. You know, I found this throne speech to be quite refreshing. I used the words cautiously optimistic to describe my initial response to this. There's a number of areas covered in the throne speech, many, many areas, some of which are gone into detail, some of which are in less such detail. You know, there's no question, in my view, that people are front and center, the focus of this throne speech. And I did particularly applaud the throne speech commemorating the good work of David Barrett, who frankly is one of my heroes, a man who stood for principle when he ran for politics, a man who made decisions based on evidence, and sometimes they weren't popular decisions. But the test of time is such that much of his legacy still remains with us today, whether it be the Agricultural Land Reserve, whether it be quite a number of our environmental programs and positions here in British Columbia, or whether it be our public auto insurance, which admittedly is under some financial stress as we speak. The throne speech outlines a number of areas in terms of affordability and housing, childcare, economic opportunity, services for people, including healthcare, education, public safety, infrastructure, mental health, and of course a section towards the end on climate change. Now, Honourable Speaker, as you will know, the results of the last election were such that there was no clear majority of MLAs in this House, and as such, the BC Green Caucus went into negotiations with both the Liberals and the NDP to see if we could come to an agreement that would allow for confidence in supply to be given in throne speech and budget measures, while retaining our autonomy in terms of a minority as opposed to a coalition government. The key issue that ultimately our agreement came down upon was the issue of climate change, an issue of one where we felt ultimately the previous government was not really willing to take the steps necessary to deliver on the promises made both at the time and previously by the government led by Gordon Campbell, a government, as you know, Honourable Speaker, that I supported and worked with to try to develop the policy measures that were systematically dismantled year after year once leadership changed at that level. I didn't think it would be easy, Honourable Speaker. The last election campaign was not an easy one to be a BC Green. It was very personal, a lot of very partisan attacks. I honestly didn't think it would be possible that the BC Greens would be able to set up a confidence in supply agreement with the BC NDP. There it is, in all honesty. It was a personal campaign. But ultimately, in sitting at that table in those days in the lead up to our final decision, it became apparent to me, to my colleague Sonia, who was at the table, and that both the Premier and the now Finance Minister were people that we felt we could relate to, people who we believed ultimately wanted to put the best interests of British Columbians front and center in decision-making. Not the backroom crowd, but British Columbians. And again, people watching the media in the lead-up to the actual agreement would notice that there was some tension, some public tension between the leader of the official opposition and myself in terms of some disagreements that typically got amplified far beyond what they actually were. But in those discussions, it became very clear to me that the Premier cared. He was a person who cared about the best wishes of not just his constituents, but all British Columbians. And ultimately, it was clear to me that we were going to go into an agreement with the BC NDP. And I haven't regretted it since that day. The proof has been in what has been delivered in our discussions, our deliberations, and where we have come to today. Now, I recognize there's a lack of substance in some of these issues brought forward in the throne speech. And I'm the first one to call out the fact that there's a lot of rhetoric and at times little substance in some key areas. But my experience, our experience over these last 6 or 7 months has been one of collaboration, of actually being listened to, of actually trying to do what's right as opposed to what's populist. You know, and we see it now in what's going on in British Columbia, where a government essentially says, you know what, we recognize that the product that is in a pipe, diluted bitumen, there had never been an environmental assessment process when that product switched from synthetic crude, which used to be shipped, and where diluted bitumen started getting packed in with that. There was never any assessment. And even in the NEB process, there were clear recommendations that came out and conditions that had to be met, a number of which are British Columbia conditions. So when the government says that it's going to do what it must do, which is look out for the interests of British Columbians, by trying to develop an understanding of the science of diluted bitumen, if spilled over our streams and lakes as this product comes across this province. Simply doing what's right, we get a knee-jerk response, not only a petty response from Alberta, but it saddens me most. It saddens me the way that the BC Liberals are playing politics over this. You know, the leader of the official opposition just said that British Columbia will be an embarrassing jurisdiction. British Columbia will never be an embarrassing jurisdiction. He argued that if we don't cave in to the demands of Alberta, we will become an embarrassing jurisdiction. What sort of jurisdiction is embarrassing when we are the most beautiful place in the world to live, where we have some of the best and brightest minds in the world come here because of the quality of life we can offer? Our education system worldwide is second to none. Industry is thriving, and we're a destination of choice for people all over the world. I'm not embarrassed about that, Honourable Speaker. I'll never be embarrassed about that. And frankly, I'm proud to say that we support the decision of the Environment Minister and the Premier in terms of doing what's right, in terms of listening to the Royal Society of Canada expert panel report, the National Academy of Sciences in the United States expert panel report. The former says we don't know what's going to happen with the spill of diluted bitumen. The latter says we simply can't clean it up. The Premier wants to simply explore the science behind that to ensure that we are protected here in British Columbia, that our natural beauty, that the risk that we're taking is actually mitigated, that someone's willing to clean up. And the response we get is that this is petty, and British Columbia will be an embarrassing jurisdiction if we don't cave. Shame on the leader of the official opposition for that. You know, and to actually have the audacity to claim that somehow Alberta is right to take it out on the BC wine industry just is mind-boggling. We should be united together in this legislature, united together, standing up for BC wine industry, telling all of Canada that it is not okay. It is not okay to put the rights of a multinational based in Texas and its shareholders against small business owners in the Okinawans, putting small business owners, British family business, protecting the rights of British Columbians. That's what we're elected to do. We're not elected to ensure profits are maximized in a multinational. We're elected to ensure that, that externalities are internalized, and that if there's going to be a spill, there's money there available to clean up that spill. But nobody talks about that. And then just today, or just yesterday rather, we hear Mr. Trudeau say that in fact it was a horse trade. All of this was really just a horse trade because we wanted Notley to bring in her climate plan, and the only way we'd get her to do that is if we gave her something. But we're not going to give her Energy East because the mayor of Montreal was quite upset. And there's an awful lot of Liberal seats in Quebec that we might lose, and who cares about BC anyway? Who cares about BC? There's only a few Liberal seats, and we might gain as many in Alberta and Saskatchewan as we lose in BC. This is the way the decision was made. It was not made because of what's in the best interest of Canada or British Columbians. And again, I was the only MLA in this legislature who participated in that NEB process. And I participated in two different ways. I was qualified twice. First as an expert with background in ocean physics, and second as an MLA representing an affected area. And in both those cases, we examined these documents very, very carefully. Now, while I know members opposite and the government was very, very free and easy with approving, but did they actually know that the entire oil spill response in that process was predicated on the existence of calm conditions with no waves, winds blowing offshore, if any, and 20 hours of sunlight? Now, Honourable Speaker, there is not a latitude south of Tuktoyaktuk that has 20 hours of sunlight on any day of the year. So you would think, as a participant asking for a more realistic scenario, that I'd get a response. But no, the response I get is, the NEB has enough information on which to make a decision. I could outline a litany of these. The model that was used for the ocean circulation in the region. Do you know how that's validated? How do you think a model was validated? Now, these are complex numerical models that have thousands of lines of code that are essentially discretizing very complex physics. And the way it was validated was a guy fell off a BC ferries and drifted, and the model said kind of drifted the right way. Like, you can't make this stuff up, Honourable Speaker. The boundary conditions for the model were were validated using tides. Well, you don't need a complex model looking at the mixing in the Strait of Juan de Fuca or Georgia Strait to talk about tides. Tides we've known about for decades. The model was incorrect, was not the appropriate tool to be used. And it was not only me who said it, it was David Farmer, Royal Society of London, distinguished scholar, who was also at the Institute of Ocean Sciences, said the same thing, as did others who participated. So I applaud government, and I'm glad that they're actually standing up. And I'm glad that today, just moments ago, the government announced that it would take steps to promote BC wines. My very first response was to go out and buy 3 bottles of BC wine. One from Thornhill Creek, ironically and quite appropriately, Canada's first carbon-neutral winery. One, somewhat humorously, from Dirty Laundry, based in Summerland. You know, joking NDP Alberta, NDP in BC. I thought it was appropriate. And third one, Mission Hill, of course, symbolic of the race that was there. But that was my response. What was the BC Liberal response? It was blaming government. It wasn't standing up for industry. And what's worse, when in those 10 days I spent in Kelowna, and I consulted wine industry expert after wine industry expert after restaurateur, let me tell you, the wine industry in BC is very, very upset at the BC Liberals right now. And I'll tell you why, Honourable Speaker. Because despite my protestation sitting opposite, pointing out that I did not believe that those specialty wine licenses would stand up to a NAFTA challenge, despite my saying, don't do this, I'm not sure you've got the appropriate legal advice. Government went ahead and created 6 new specialty wine store licenses for grocery stores to sell wines in BC. We're not talking about the 50 or 60, I forget the number, that were grandfathered in prior to these trade agreements that are owned by the Wine Institute. But these are 6 new ones that the government decided to create. Well, we now have a WTO trade complaint launched by Australia against British Columbia wines because of these 6. We have a NAFTA challenge launched by the US over these 6 licenses. That's the BC Liberal response. They have the gall and the audacity to say that we're not protecting BC wine, as the government announces measures today to actually promote BC wine. Yet they have led, their direct policy measurements have led to WTO and NAFTA challenges directly against BC on the international scene. You know, you should take a look at your own house before you start throwing stones at other people's houses, to be honest. And that's what, Honourable Speaker, is so refreshing about this throne speech, is I truly believe it steps back and makes us reflect upon what's important in British Columbia. I'm going to go through the throne speech, Honourable Speaker, and give credit to now members' opposition for some of the ideas in it that clearly were put forward by them and that have been adopted by the BC NDP. For example, when we talk about the actions of affordability, in the throne speech, the BC NDP outlined the number of actions that have happened, one of which was to cut MSP premiums in half. Now, we recognize that BC Liberals had already promised that. They'd already promised to do that. Again, this is an issue that we felt we could have done much more aggressively, and we campaigned on eliminating them through bringing it into a progressive healthcare premium, much akin to what's done in Ontario. But we recognize that this has been done. We applaud this, and we congratulate the BC Liberals on making sure this happened. We talk, another thing that happened in there is they talk about affordability measures with respect to the removal of tolls. Now, I recognize that the BC NDP and the BC campaigned on this. I recognize the BC Liberals were a little more subtle in their campaigning, and rather than eliminating the tolls, they were going to put a cap on, which frankly was a little more clever because it would not have allowed for the transfer of debt onto provincial debt to be taxpayer supported. But in the throne speech that happened this summer, again, the Liberals were also going to eliminate the tolls. So we really were standing alone in saying we don't support it. We continue not to support it, but that's the nature of a democracy. We don't believe that's correct, but we understand that it's moving forward, and the BC NDP and, frankly, the BC Liberals will have to explain that to the voters. We've told you why we don't like it. We don't like it because we think it's fiscally irresponsible policy. It's a form of vote buying, in our view, and it actually transfers onto provincial debt, taxpayer-supported debt, $4.7 billion that makes us it puts us in a position where we can't deal with some of the things that we might otherwise do, like stop Site C, which honestly is something that I still don't understand to this day, based on the fiscal outlook of what that's going to cost. And also, in the case of the Golden Ears and Mans Bridges, outlined as a success to date, we know that that was not done in consultation with local mayors who opposed it. And the concern over this is there is a discussion right now happening in Metro Vancouver on mobility pricing. Whether that comes to fruition or not is not the issue. The issue is once you pull away tolls, it's very difficult to put them on. And there are unforeseen consequences, like people who wanted to pay those tolls because they wanted to have access in a more timely fashion to the Vancouver region. You know, another action on affordability that was highlighted, cutting student loan interest by 2.5% so that graduates can get out of debt more quickly on their path to a chosen career. Obviously, we wholeheartedly support that, and again, this is something that the BC Liberals had promised to do, and I'm pleased that we have an example where the BC NDP have adopted something the BC Liberals have done that we agree to as well. Let's focus on our successes. We have all agreement in this House that this is a good thing to do. That's what we're elected to do, is to put forward good public policy. We hear about making adult education and language learning tuition free so that tens of thousands of British Columbians can prepare for a degree and upgrade their skills work. Great public policy, something we supported. Glad to see that that's a success, and something that we started to see emerge in the Liberals' throne speech in the summer as well. On the topics of affordability in the throne speech, the government points to its attempt to keep hydro rates affordable, and they've asked BC Commission to freeze hydro rates for the next year. Now, I appreciate the softening in that language because obviously you cannot have your cake and eat it too in this area, Honourable Speaker, in light of the fact that you can't campaign on freezing BC hydro rates and also campaign on the autonomy of the BCUC because they're mutually inconsistent. Either you agree to the autonomy of the BCUC and make a suggestion that you'd like to see it frozen, or you freeze it through order in council, which historically had been done by the BC Liberals. Now, the reality is I'm not sure that BCUC will approve that. Frankly, BC Hydro looks pretty foolish after having a 4% rent increase approved by the BCUC as part of a long-term plan. They look pretty foolish going to the BCUC now and saying, we don't really want an increase. If I were on the BCUC, I'd be asking, so what's changed with your accounting? Frankly, it doesn't instill confidence in BC Hydro if they can actually suddenly justify, through different accounting, the lack of an increase. You know, if BCUC rejects a freeze, so be it. I think the electorate are the ones who the government will have to be accountable to. We did not campaign on freezing BC Hydro rates, nor did the BC Liberals, because frankly, I don't think it's fiscally responsible. And honestly, it doesn't actually deal with the issue of affordability. It doesn't actually deal with the issue of affordability. Let's take a look at a simple example that would. Right now, we have Tier 1 and Tier 2 rates. Now, if there are 6 people living in a small house, they're almost certainly going to be having 6 showers. They're going to have 6 bedrooms that are heated. They might have an electric car that they share. But their fixed Tier 1 rate is the same as somebody in a 10,000-foot mansion with 1 person. You know, the electricity usage is not normalized by the number of people it's being applied to. It's basically Tier 1 based on your actually meter. That's not right. That doesn't actually address the issue. The issue would be addressed by dealing with the rates, the Tier 1, Tier 2, and focusing on providing assistance, like has been done in other provinces, particularly in cold provinces where heating bills can be outrageous in the winter. I don't know how, you know, I'm getting a $750 electricity bill. It's kind of high for 2 months, but there's 4 people in my house. But I don't know how somebody on low income could afford $750, particularly if they live in Dawson Creek, particularly if they're heating their homes with electricity instead of gas. How could they afford this? This is the measures and means and ways we deal with the affordability issue, is by targeting those who need the leg up, rather than blanket hydro rate freezers for one and all. Well, again, I've never been opposed to natural gas. Right now is a premium for heating. It's actually quite cheap. It's $2 and change at Chetwynd, I understand, $2.50 or something like that. Really, really cheap. It's, you know, you're basically losing money taking it out of the ground in northern BC. But the way you make money, the reason why Fort Nelson is dried up is because there's dry gas fields, obviously, but we got the liquids in the Montney, which we can actually sell. You know, I met in Kelowna, Honourable Speaker, on this topic that was so astutely brought up by my friend from Peace River South. I met in Kelowna West a fellow in a coffee shop who had just left Fort Nelson. He'd sold his natural gas company. And the reason why he left is he felt that the economics, the long-term economics of natural gas is not good in light of the fact that there is a global oversupply. And what's his focus? Where has he moved into? He's moved into the petrochemical and value-added industry in the carbon sector. There is a future. We're going to need plastics. We can actually extract hydrogen from the methane. We can actually create hydrogen, which is a storage fuel. There is a lot of innovation potential that can and will happen in our natural gas sector. But it means we've got to think differently from what we're doing. You know, in the throne speech, another success that was mentioned was ICBC, or rather, that years of the throne speech states, and I quote, "Years of apparent neglect and inaction have led to big problems at BC's public auto insurer. This government has rejected the double-digit increases in rates for drivers and has taken decisive action to keep rates down." That's a success that is outlined in response to the escalating financial crisis within ICBC. Now, again, we were somewhat critical of government when after the initial report was made public, that things were taken off the table prior to actually standing back and reflecting upon that which was actually contained and what the solutions were. But we do know that we do support a number of the measures. We do believe that, you know, the red light cameras being enabled is a good thing. They were just turned off. We do believe that we need to take a close look at some of the soft tissue claims. We also like to focus where we're focusing on the patient and the care rather than on the actual litigation or litigative aspects of ICBC. But there's an awful lot that needs to be done. In other jurisdictions that have public insurance, there's a form of no fault. I know that trial lawyers will be very upset about this, but it's a discussion we need to have about keeping prices down. Other provinces that don't have public insurance have a form of private insurance. And with private insurance, you start to get rules and regulations as to why someone would actually offer you insurance, for example. They put limits on claims, or they will limit the amount that they'll pay off on claims. Again, we recognize, we believe that that's a discussion we should have. Obviously, our preference is to fix ICBC. As I said at the very beginning, it is a legacy, frankly, a good legacy, of Dave Barrett, who was mentioned in the beginning of the throne speech as a leader in British Columbia. We continue to look forward to see how the Attorney General, who I see has joined us here, I do apologize, Honourable Speaker, I'm not supposed to mention about the presence or absence of any member in the House. We do look forward to seeing the measures that he will continue to outline as we move forward with respect to revitalizing ICBC. To the issue of housing. Now, we know that the issue of affordability is fundamentally coupled with the issue of housing availability and affordability. It's not only reducing tolls, it's not only eliminating MSPs or reducing them, but it's actually being able to find a place to live, and a place to live and a house to live in that you can afford. Now, the BC NDP, during the last election campaigned vigorously on the fact that they would be taking steps to deal with both supply and demand. I tend to agree with the member or the leader of the official opposition that the 114,000 new unit number is wishful. I'm not so sure I understand where that number comes from, and I do resonate with the analysis that was presented. But on the other hand, I do recall, and I commended and continue to, the good work of the now Attorney General, who was raising so many issues with respect to the demand side. We see mention in the throne speech that government's first step must be to address demand and stabilize BC's out-of-control real estate and rental market. I'm very pleased to see those words there, because we know that this is not a supply problem. It is a demand problem. We know that there are 7.5 billion people in the world. We know that around the world there are tumultuous times. And we know that real estate is a safe haven, particularly when it's British Columbia real estate. And a lot of capital is coming into BC. That capital is being parked here as an investment, as a bank account, to ensure that money is protected because of our stable democracy, our quality of life, our attractiveness, and the fact that real estate, particularly in some regions, was affordable. The issue of affordability, Honourable Speaker, I will be designate on this particular speech. The issue of affordability is not only a Metro Vancouver issue nowadays. Perceived value is not there to the extent it was in Vancouver, but perceived value is there in Victoria, in Kelowna, in Nanaimo, in Parksville, and many other places in British Columbia, where we're now seeing prices dramatically increase. Dramatically increase as people leave Vancouver and say, I'll sell my $300,000 bungalow that I bought 15 years ago for millions, and I'll come and drop $1 million in Victoria. What's that? And I'll pocket $2 million and do very well as a retirement fund. The problem here is the disparity between income and rent, as well as housing, has grown so much that we have a crisis. And crises require dramatic steps. Tinkering around the edges will not deal with the problem. You know, my own property assessment value, its paper increase, went up 25% in 1 year. 25% in 1 year. All that tells me is we need a 25% correction in the market where I live, because that's a completely artificial gain. It doesn't reflect the value of my home. It reflects speculation in my part of the riding of Oak Bay Gordon Head, which has seen out of control real estate prices. You know, I look, and we called for bold steps, mirroring what was done New Zealand, mirroring what was done in Australia. Bold steps to say we have a crisis now. And when you have a crisis, you need to deal with this in a very, very firm way. We called for a ban on offshore capital being allowed to buy property, land in British Columbia. The stories we got, Honourable Speaker, whether it be the thousands of hectares in northern BC that were bought up by offshore corporations to grow hay that is bubble wrapped and shipped abroad, creating an externality of rising hay prices in the region and lack of availability. This isn't right. We've heard stories about one constituent who came into my office, well, two of them actually, how they had two friends come here, or friends of friends come here on a tourist visa, and each of these business people bought 5 houses and then got on a plane and went home, and those 5 houses lie vacant. We've got story after story after story flooding our inbox, and let me tell you, Honourable Speaker, I have never seen so much support for an issue as I have seen for a support to take immediate steps to clamp down on the ability of offshore capital to come into British Columbia to purchase our real estate. You know, Honourable Speaker, a number of years ago, I think it's 3 years ago now, after a seniors' home and the issue of MSP premiums and the affordability issue there was raised, I raised it in this House. We started a campaign, a petition campaign. We started a public relations campaign to gauge public support. And it was overwhelming that people felt it was a regressive tax and they wanted to see it dealt with in a progressive fashion. We received thousands and thousands of emails. A petition had tens of thousands of names on it. But that pales into comparison as to the support for taking steps now. You know, the most outspoken, the most passionate people speaking out are actually first-generation immigrants to British Columbia. People who came to British Columbia with their families in many cases for a better life. They came to this country because of what we could offer in terms of opportunities, of jobs, for places to live, for the beautiful environment. And now they see that their children are no longer afforded the same opportunities that they were. And these are the people speaking out. These are the people who are begging government to take steps. And so while I asked it again today in question period, and I got the same answer that we must wait the budget, let me tell government that there is pent-up anxiety here on this issue, and we hope that government delivers on its promises. We certainly hope that government delivers on its promises. You know, we were somewhat disappointed with the response which is being done with respect to Airbnb. We recognize that it was a good first step from a taxation point of view, but Airbnb got the best advertising they could possibly have wanted here in British Columbia. Unless you couple that with an aggressive ability to allow municipalities to actually limit, to have business licenses, or to tax vacancy rates tax through vacancy rates across the province, this will do little other than incentivize a particular company, a winner. The government has in essence chosen a winner. What about vacation rental VRBO, Vacation Rentals by Owner, another organization? What about the people who list on Craigslist? It's a dangerous precedent to set when you have picking winners and losers, particularly when we're in a 0% or close to 0% vacancy rate. You know, the throne speech says that government will introduce legislation to crack down on tax fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering in BC's real estate market. We are very excited about that, and we welcome that, and we look forward to the details that will be outlined, hopefully in the budget coming up next week. And again, in the throne speech, the budget talks about the government will begin to make the largest investment in affordable housing in BC's history, including social housing, student housing, seniors housing, Indigenous housing, affordable rentals for middle-income families, and so on and so forth. We welcome investment in affordable housing, and we look forward to see what the specifics are in this regard. We were very concerned about some of the language emanating out with respect to how the rental agreements will be changed, because we must protect renters and the rights of renters, but we also must protect the rights of landlords, particularly those people who didn't have any pension, those people who put real estate as the source of their pension. if we start to clamp down on their ability to make ends meet, we don't actually deal with the problem of affordability, we create an additional problem. The throne speech talks about enabling local governments to plan for affordable rental housing by zoning areas of their communities for that. Again, we're excited to see that this is coming through. It's been asked for by both the UBCM as well as the City of Vancouver. And one of the things we campaigned on, which we're pleased to see in Rare, is that the government plans through the throne speech to work with local governments to help plan for and build housing near transit corridors. It makes sense, it reduces congestion, and it maximally utilizes space. We're interested to learn more, details were scant, about what the government's thoughts are on this new housing hub that's being proposed as a division of BC Housing. We're unsure as what this goal is, but it seems essential that new supply would meet the needs of the communities that are seeking new supply, and we assume the housing hub will actually work to ensure government investment matches community needs in some way or another. And again, looking forward to the details coming up with that. Coming to where we're a little concerned and what we're again looking for information for, it's the issue of security and safeties for renters, where it says governments will introduce stronger protections for renters and owners of manufactured homes and protections for renters facing eviction due to renovation or demolition. Now again, clearly there are some very high-profile cases where seniors or others are being evicted for renovictions, so-called renovictions, for a simple paint and shuffle so that rents could be jacked up. Clearly, we share the concern of government in that regard. However, again, one has to be very careful in introducing legislation that one doesn't hurt the good landlords and actually doesn't stop them from being able to continue to rent. Because as we know, if you start to put more and more regulations on housing, rentals, we may start to drive that stock out of the rental market unless it's done carefully. Because there comes a point when someone says, it's just not worth the hassle. I'll hold this, but I'm not going to rent it. Because if I rent it, my rent is so controlled that it's going to cost me $10K when the tenant moves out, and now I can't reap that. One has to be very, very, very careful with this. At the same time, we do have forms of renovictions going on now. We have demevictions going on now. In the heart of Burnaby, near the Kingsgate Mall, where low-lying three-story apartment buildings are being condemned left, right, and center. And it's going on now, as we speak, right now in downtown Kelowna, as land assemblies are being made in downtown Kelowna. Along Cambie Street in Vancouver, it's one big land assembly. Now, this sounds like, okay, we're going to end up building rental accommodation or condos or whatever. But when you displace these people and you just hold these properties for land assembly, you're creating affordability issues. The city of Burnaby is in crisis from a rental perspective, as high-end condos are replacing low-lying affordable rental units with no plan in place to actually deal with the displaced people. This is a crisis. Sure, it brings in lots of money through development fees, et cetera, and through taxes to municipal coffers. But it creates a social problem that we have to get a handle on. So we're looking forward to seeing what, as the government talks about introducing the housing measures, how it's going to deal with issues like this, with issues like pre-sales of condominiums and others offshore. One of the things that we're delighted to see in this throne speech, Honourable Speaker, is a very positive step forward. It's a positive step forward that we tried to pressure, as did the now government of the former government, to take steps to remedy. That is the inability at present of colleges and universities across British Columbia to build student housing on their campuses without incurring public debt. There are so many potential, there are people waiting across British Columbia, whether it be Camosun College in my riding, University of Victoria in my riding, whether it be UBC, Simon Fraser, whether it be Kwantlen College, Capilano has no housing. The ability for these institutions to build housing on campus will take students out of the market in larger communities onto campuses, thereby easing pressure as well in the larger communities. And we have a captive audience on campuses. We know that if there are creative means of allowing these institutions access to capital, we know that capital has a clientele that will service it in perpetuity. Those are the students in the institution. And they can do so in a very effective means. So we're very pleased to see this. The government also talks about, in the throne speech, they'll be making the largest investment in retrofits and renovation of social housing in BC in more than 20 years. You know, talking about these upgrades will preserve much needed housing stock, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce home heating bills. Now again, cautiously optimistic, but I get a little worried about the amount of money being spent and where that money is going to be coming from. So this is why we're quite excited, as the throne speech mentions the Emerging Economy Task Force and the Innovation Commission, that there is a very real move to invigorate the BC economy in areas where we're leaders, not only today, but also tomorrow. But with that, we also recognize that the retrofitting creates cottage industries of renewable energy companies, building designers, and so forth. And we know the previous premier, prior to the last government, recognized that too, through the programs that he and his government introduced that actually spurned growth in a diverse array of the building sector, the clean, green building growth. And it's a matter of saving money. It's a matter of saving money. If you can actually spend 15% to build a little bit more to build a building right now, you'll amortize that on a few years based on today's technology. It's about giving people the ability to do that, and we look forward to seeing how that's going to come down in weeks ahead. To the issue of childcare, much has been made about the lack of the word $10 a day in the throne speech. To be honest, that's a slogan. The actual $10 a day plan was a community plan. That's what it used to be called. Didn't have as catchy a slogan. We recognize that childcare is an important component both of our platform, the NDP platform, and also the Liberal throne speech, that we need investments in this. But the investments must come strategically, not only in just through a slogan, but ensuring that we have quality access, not only childcare, but early childhood education and educators for our next generation, the future of our society. We see a lot in the throne speech about childcare. We're a little troubled by the lack of discussion in there about early childhood education. Childcare is not about building spaces. Childcare is also about ensuring that we treat the profession of early childhood educators and childcare providers as a valued, high-paying profession in our society. One of the barriers to actual access of childcare is the barriers of actual trained ECEs, because as a society, we seem to think it's okay to pay slightly above minimum wage, to pay people who are looking after our next generation in the most critical years of their development. Like, we really need to give our head a shake as a society if we think and expect a childcare provider to earn $15 an hour, and we're going to get people, the best and brightest, who run it just in this profession. They got to make ends meet. They have to afford bus fare. They have to afford to eat, and it's tough. So we're hoping that we see not only the creation of spaces, but incentive programs that will actually supplement the wages of our early childhood increases. And such programs did exist in BC. And they probably still exist in some, but not to the scale that they needed. We have to recognize that we need to ensure that ECEs, childcare providers, are viewed like teachers as the most important profession in our society, because what sort of society are we if we don't view as our #1 priority the education of our next generation, who are the next generation that will take care of us as we age, the next generation who will discover the cure for cancer, the next generation who will find the innovation to ensure that BC's economy is competitive international. That is why in the last election we campaigned on investing more than $4 billion over 4 years into both public education as well as early childhood education and childcare. You know, we have a present system in early childhood and in childcare whereby access is a problem. Let's suppose I'm a low-income person and I want to get access to a childcare space. I have to pay up front, and at the end of the year, when I file my tax return, I get my childcare tax credit back. Well, I don't need the money then. I needed it to pay my fees up front, which is why one of the innovative ways that we put in our platform was actually to change the childcare tax credit into a childcare taxable benefit. That is, money up front isn't a barrier, but if you earn below a certain amount and you access that childcare, it's viewed as a taxable benefit. Let those who pay and those who want to pay and the ability to pay, pay. As Karen Isaac, Executive Director of BC Aboriginal Childcare Society, said, given the long history of Aboriginal children being forcibly removed from their families and communities to residential schools and current high numbers of Aboriginal children being taken into government care, it is no wonder that some poverty-stricken families may be ambivalent about government childcare programs and see it as another type of policing over children and their families. We must be particularly careful as to how we implement and roll out our childcare strategies in Indigenous communities in British Columbia. Our view of what appropriate childcare is, when I say our, the majority of members in this House, is not the same view as many Indigenous communities across British Columbia. Indigenous communities have a rich history, frankly, rich is the wrong word, have a sordid history of having their children taken from their families, of being forced to have their children taken to schools that they did not intend to go to. So we look forward to seeing how this will play out in the days and weeks ahead. We're also keen to see that government's looking to create more childcare spaces, but there was some worry again in the language of the throne speech, where we talk about a main focus on changing unlicensed to licensed providers. That's important. We want our children to be looked after licensed providers, but that's not the only thing we need to focus on. Obviously, this so-called Baby Mac law will be critical in terms of dealing with issues that led to the tragic death of Baby Mac in 2017. However, we must remember that it's not only about creation of spaces. It doesn't just mean converting unlicensed to licensed. It also means about attracting new people into the profession by paying them well, by ensuring that societies value this through education, and by working with employers to help facilitate employers actually building childcare and early childhood education programs in their corporations and places. There was a lack of focus of early childhood education in the throne speech. To us, our view is that childcare, by it says, not only about babysitting, it's about education. When a child is growing from those early years through to puberty and adulthood, they are very much influenced by the surroundings about them. And we hope that as we discuss the child care plan moving forward, that we recognize and reflect upon not only the rights of Aboriginal people, but also the importance of education in childcare. I'm very pleased in the throne speech that we hear a focus on poverty reduction. The BC Liberals have acknowledged that they've stopped listening to British Columbians about the importance of poverty reduction, about the importance of the growing disparity between those who have and those who don't, and about, from a purely fiscal point of view, the fact that it costs society when this disparity grows in terms of the services that have to be provided. You eliminate poverty, you eliminate the needs for a lot of social services designed to actually deal with poverty. This is why a housing first strategy is the preferred approach by so many poverty advocates, and why it was being so successful in jurisdictions in the United States where it's been implemented. You promote a housing first strategy, you cannot deal with issues of mental health and substance abuse unless you get someone in a home, a safe, stable place to be. Once they're there, these other issues can be dealt with. And in doing so, you save from the judicial system, You save in the hospital system, the medical system. You save in the healthcare system. You save in the welfare system. You give people housing first, and we hope that we see a move towards that as this government continues to deliver on its throne speech. We're thrilled with the discussion of the BC Human Rights Commission and the fact that it'll be rejuvenated, and we're delighted with the report that was recently released by the Fair Wage Commission, alluded to in the throne speech. You know, again, $15 was a slogan. How do we get there is what matters. And what do we do beyond that? We strongly support the recommendations of the Fair Wage Commission to become an established entity in perpetuity in this jurisdiction in order to take politics out of this decision-making in setting minimum wage. Excuse me. We also look forward to seeing what some of these labor code changes are going to look like. We have little details, again, much rhetoric in the throne speech. Good words. I'm not criticizing the words, but some of the details we await to see and look forward to exploring those with our colleagues on both sides of this House. Now, coming to the economy, I am absolutely delighted, and our caucus is delighted, with the focus in this throne speech on what BC can be leaders at or are leaders at. I take the example of the forest industry. This is one of our strategic strengths. We have in British Columbia 3 things that no one else in the world can compete with us with. Number 1, we are the most beautiful place in the world to live. I get nods over there from the members opposite. Number 2, we have one of the best education systems in the world. I got nods there from the former Minister of Education. And international assessments year after year have BC at the top. I also have nods over here from another minister. There's collegiality here. It's Valentine's Day. We all got to get on. It's a strategic strength. We know that we can offer employers some of the most highly skilled and educated workers in the world. And because of our environment, we can attract and retain them here because it's the most beautiful place to live. But we also have access to boundless forests, wood, energy in renewable forms, and water. These are our strategic strengths that it's recognized within this throne speech that we can build on as we move towards a sustainable, diverse economy of the 21st century. We can actually race to the bottom and try to play that game, but we will lose that game. Honourable Speaker, if I dig dirt out of the ground in BC, there's a cost that we internalize here. We value our social programs. We value the importance of a minimum wage. We value our environment. And it costs a little more to dig the dirt out of the ground here compared to, say, some place like Indonesia, where the same environmental and social costs are not internalized as part of the cost of doing business. We can compete by trying to do a race from the bottom and forget our values. This is what we've been doing with LNG. I'll come back to that in a second. Or we can recognize that the way we compete, the way we grow our GDP is through more efficient means of doing it, by bringing our technology sector together with our resource sector. We rely on Finnish technology in our forest sector because Finland recognized that bringing its forestry sector together with its technology sector would lead to innovation in terms of more efficient extraction, as well as the ability to sell the knowledge and the technology associated with that efficiency. We have in British Columbia some world-leading companies. One of my favorite is MineSense. MineSense is a BC-based company that is at the rock face, is able to determine whether or not it's efficient to ship rock and crush it or lay it aside. This is a means and ways of extracting mining in much more efficient ways, more clean ways, more greener ways that allows us to compete not only in the pure mineral extraction, but through the technology that we've done. And this throne speech recognizing that our strengths are not in racing to the bottom, but in the fact that we are smarter and we can attract and retain the best and the brightest. And let me give you another example, Honourable Speaker. Structurlam. Structurlam is an incredible Penticton-based value-added forest company that makes crosslam and glulam for replacements for steel and concrete. 18-story student residence at UBC being built from 100% wood, crosslam and glulam products. Portland has a facility being built there from BC products, crosslam and glulam. Alberta, across BC, The Harbour Air Terminal. These are beautiful value-add products that actually employ hundreds of people and use BC wood, family-based wood. They have a partnership with Kalishnikov family out in Nelson to provide some of their lumber. And this is where we succeed. Why do we need to ship a raw log to Korea or to China? China and Korea don't need raw logs. They need lumber. They need value-added products. And if we bring technology together with our resource sector, we can do so more efficiently because the shipping is minimal in terms of the overall cost. It's the same coming back to the pipeline. Why are we shipping diluted bitumen? Why are we shipping, even talking about shipping diluted bitumen to Asian markets? Frankly, I don't even know that there's an economic case for Kinder Morgan as it stands, because the largest supplier was going to be California, which now is going to get access to its upgrading products from the Keystone XL that's just been approved. But nevertheless, why would we ship those jobs offshore? This isn't good for the Canadian economy. This isn't good for jobs. Those jobs get shipped offshore. And what's worse, we're now building a construction facility in Vancouver Airport to import jet fuel. So rather than making the jet fuel here in British Columbia or in Alberta, we ship those jobs off and re-import. That's the race to the bottom that I think we need to move away from. And coming to LNG, we've had 4 years of this race to the bottom. This race to the bottom where we've tried so desperately to land the impossible that we literally gave away the farm. We're not going to earn any royalties from natural gas for many, many years of any value or substance because of the deep well credits, where there was it's more now, but there were $3.2 billion of unclaimed tax credits against future royalties because of the deep well credits, which were designed back in the day when it was kind of costly to get deep vertical drills going. Since then, everyone's got horizontal drilling, costs have come down, and what's worse is the previous government then jacked up the credits to shallow wells as well. So we're not going to earn any money on royalties. So where will we earn this LNG money? That fortunately we're not focusing on this throne speech. Well, we'd earned it in the LNG income tax. Well, no, capital costs are coming in there, the income tax is cut. We offer below market electricity, ratepayer funded Site C to deliver electricity into LNG. You know, literally we give away the farm. Landed cost of LNG in Asia, years from now, it was $4 and change a few months back. It's probably, I don't know what it is exactly, it's gone up a bit, probably $6 and change. It costs us $4 to get it out of the ground here in BC. We can sell it for $2.50 at Chetwynd. It costs us about $11 landed to actually sell it in China. How's it going to happen? How is it going to happen? What business case is it that a company is going to make a major investment here in British Columbia to lose money on every BTU of natural gas they produce? Louisiana already has the infrastructure on the coast down there. And they already are taking up any supply gaps that existed. The Isthmus of Panama was recently widened. Russia has 20 times the total reserves of all of Canada. And it's conventional gas, not shale gas. And they've signed contracts in and around Asia. China is now a seller of contracts because they're oversupplied. We've got Australia not bringing onshore stuff that was almost ready to go because there's no demand. And we think that this is going to be the direction for prosperity in British Columbia. What makes me sad, Honourable Speaker, what makes me sad is the false promises that were made by this BC Liberal government before us to the people of British Columbia. False hope, undelivered hope. And now the continued pressure to try to deliver the impossible while recognizing that so many other opportunities are there and we're missing out on. I'd like to take us back to March the 3rd of 2015. March the 3rd of 2015 was when I sat across, again, saying, I've been saying this since 2012, LNG is not going to happen because the market is not there for it. And in March the 3rd, 2015, the then Minister of Natural Gas said, "You didn't do your research. You don't know what you're talking about. I know the status of discussions. I know when the final investment decisions are coming. I know when the companies are planning on making those. I will enjoy the meal to watch the member opposite eat his words in the next year or two." This was 2015. "I will enjoy watching him eat his words as final investment decisions come that are coming down the pike, and he sees the construction of LNG. A couple of months later, he says, I want to be invited to the dinner when he has to eat those words. It will happen in the not-too-distant future, I believe. You know, Honourable Speaker, it's 2018, it's 3 years from now, and still nothing. The fact that the members opposite think that they have any credibility on any aspect of the economy is mind-boggling, especially since what finance minister errors to the tune of $2.8 billion in a financial outlook? That's reckless indifference to the actual economy, as opposed to fine stewardship of the economy. We know where that money came from, an out-of-control real estate sector and the construction industry that's supporting it. But that's not a healthy economy, Honourable Speaker. That leads to a boom and bust economy, which is why it's so critical that we diversify. We look at the place of Terrace, for example, Terrace, British Columbia. And rather than saying, we're going to try to squeeze LNG that everyone else is doing, we could be asking, what is it that you have in Terrace that no one else in the world can compete with? Well, let me tell you what they have. They have the first three things we talked about: beautiful place, quality of education, and access to resources. But they're also on a railway line between Prince Rupert and Chicago, the gateway to Asia and the gateway to Eastern US. Why is it we always focus on the raw and not the upgraded manufactured? Terrace has an amazing opportunity as a jurisdiction to try to attract manufacturing there. Why did BMW go to Washington? Why did BMW build a factory in Washington to construct carbon fiber components for their i3 electric vehicles? Because they had access to clean, renewable energy, stable workforce that they could attract and retain. Where was BC in these discussions? Chasing the natural gas unicorn or pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that kept moving. That should have been in Terrace. Prince George. Let's look at Prince George. What's its strategic strength? Well, it's cold in Prince George right now, and they got a ton of snow. I don't know whether the member from Cariboo North was able to make it here today, but I know that the member, we had some difficulty in a committee meeting because it was snowed in up in the region. But that's a strategic strength because that means it's cold. Why is it that data distribution centers are being built in the US? They should be built in Prince George, because we know the single biggest cost and the barrier to data distribution is cooling. It's cooling, and when it's a cooler place, it costs less. What's the barrier? Not the speed of light on which information is transferred. The barrier is lack of access to broadband redundancy. In British Columbia, historically, we've thought it's industry's role to build fiber and broadband capacity into communities. Now, that's great that industry has made these investments, but it's very difficult for a company, a strategic global company, to want to move into a community where its only access to broadband is owned through another company. That's uncertainty. There's a role for government, and we're delighted to see this in the throne speech. There's a role for government to create highways, not only bridges and roads that we drive trucks and cars on, but also highways for information that everyone has access to. And we're delighted to see some of that appear in the throne speech. One of the things that the throne speech mentioned with respect to the forest industry, again, very supportive of the issue with respect to upgrading and value added. This is one of our key areas. I was troubled by some of the statements there about getting the most value out of affected timber in cooperation with communities, industry, and First Nations. One has to be very, very, very careful about how you define value. Is it short-term or long-term? The quickest way to desertify, to make into a desert, large parts of the Cariboo region, are to cut down all those burnt trees, which are important for actually the rejuvenation of the next generation of forests. So again, I would urge government to ensure that they consult not only with communities, industry, and First Nations, but with scientific experts who have an understanding about forest rejuvenation, particularly academics who have done studies on this and can show you examples of where if you cut down all the burnt trees, all you leave behind is a forest, because the nutrients that were there to actually create the next generation of growth are gone. I hope government's careful with this as it moves forward. I'm really excited in the throne speech, not only of the mention of the Innovation Commissioner and the Emerging Economy Task Force, both of which we campaigned on, but what the opportunity this brings. I've met with Alan Winter twice now, the Innovation Commissioner, and I can say that British Columbia is so absolutely lucky to have a man of his caliber, of his strengths, of his connections, to be our champion for the innovation sector in British Columbia. I look forward to him taking the programs that exist in Ottawa and matching them with BC programs to ensure efficiency in delivery of support to our innovation sector. He's concerned about the fact that what happens in British Columbia is companies grow and then move to the States. He's concerned about creating the environment that will allow companies to grow and remain here in British Columbia. We have examples of where we've tried this. We have a very troubling example right now playing out in BC with Bardell Entertainment, one of British Columbia's top digital media companies, one of the world's top. A company that set up an office in Kelowna because of regional and distance tax credits to try to bring the tech industry out of Vancouver into other parts of British Columbia. When all of a sudden $5 million was pulled retroactively in the flick of a wrist or flick of a finger in an amendment that we didn't debate. And when I tried to raise some issues here, I was told we have to pass it now because the Lieutenant Governors come tomorrow. $5 million that cost that industry. So I hope that we actually start to reflect upon the importance of this sector and the diversity of the sector across British Columbia so that we nurture and grow our innovation here in BC and don't ship and export the talent elsewhere as well as the jobs elsewhere. I'm delighted, again, this was a BC Liberal agreement or a commitment in the election campaign, supported, adopted and by both the BC NDP and by us, was the creation of engineering programs across British Columbia. We know that if you don't train in an area, you often get sucked into the big metro areas of Vancouver, Victoria. The expansion of engineering program in Prince George was a great thing for diversity of our economy across this province. And we're thrilled to see that a total of 2,900 new tech-related spaces at colleges will be created as part of the throne speech over the years to come. To the issue of reconciliation. The throne speech talks about this government beginning a cross-ministry framework to meet our commitments to the United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the Chilcotin decision. Obviously, we support this, and we support the government as we move to reconciliation in partnership with First Nations. But let me tell you, there's suspicion because Indigenous communities, First Nations across our province, are sick and tired of words, and I resonate with that. As a climate scientist who spent 25 years in the area, I am sick and tired of hearing governments promise we'll reduce emissions by some amount sometime in the future, and then not delivering or taking the steps to do it. What matters to Indigenous communities is not the words, it's the action. So let's start to show real action sooner than later as we move down towards truly truth and reconciliation in this province. You know, the throne speech, Honourable Speaker, also talks about services to people under the areas of healthcare, education, and so forth. Again, we're excited about the focus in this throne speech away from corporate donors and large entities, but towards people and small business. And the focus on bringing together family doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses in a community-based approach is one that we think not only the medical community, but certainly our caucuses across this party can come to agreement on. I look at the Oceanside Health Centre in Parksville, Qualicum as a success story. The only problem with Oceanside Health Centre is not the way it's set up, but the growing demand so that it's the wait times have increased because it's a retirement community in there. But it shows a model of the future. But it requires us to think innovatively about how we have billing in the medical profession. Doctors, there are shortages, no doubt. But many of today's doctors do not want to follow the path, particularly in light of the growing bureaucracy that exists in the healthcare system, of having to run their own small businesses if they're a family practitioner. You know, any doctor who owns a family practice they'll tell you at least one day of the 5 in a week doing administration. Doctors want to be doctors. Young doctors today value the importance of quality in life as the whole millennial generation do. So thinking about innovative ways of delivering healthcare through salaried positions, through allowing nurse practitioners to actually bill, through the creation of teams is something that we strongly support, and in fact campaigned on and look forward to seeing the details of as this is fleshed out in the months and years ahead. In terms of education, again, we see the commitment to fully fund class size and composition requirements. More than 3,500 new teachers, librarians, and counselors are in BC schools helping students learn in smaller classes with more individual attention. We see this statement in the throne speech. It's quite unfortunate the way this is rolled out, as we know that we shouldn't have actually ever been in this place to begin with, frankly, if we had not taken steps to take our teachers' representatives to court multiple times up the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. We wouldn't be in a situation where suddenly we have to hire thousands of teachers in the space of a few months, creating chaos, frankly, in many, many school districts, and within the childcare and early childhood education system, where schools are scrambling for spaces and trying to actually meet the legally required commitments. You know, the throne speech talks about building schools, it talks about removing portables, it talks about seismic upgrades. That's fine, but let me tell you, what matters in education is not the color of the wallpaper or the size of the ceilings. What matters is the quality of the teacher and the resources that teacher has in the classroom, as well as the ability for a child to have access to the services they need when they need it. What we need in British Columbia is enhanced resources in the classroom. Why is it that teachers, Honourable Speaker, across British Columbia, Honourable Speaker, as a former teacher, this must resonate with you too, why is it that teachers have to spend their own money to provide the actual tools that their children have to use in the classroom? We don't ever account for that. One of the, I forget which riding you're, Surrey. Thank you. The member from Surrey Panorama. There's all these ridings in Surrey, and they're all close to each other, and they keep changing because the population is growing so fast. I forget who represents which riding. So the member from and the minister pointed out she wants to know the answer to that. Why is it as a society? Why is it as a society we don't recognize what Northern European nations recognize? That the single most important profession in our society is education, is teachers, early childhood educators, childcare providers. These are the people who train the next generation of citizenship. These are the people who create the innovators of tomorrow through providing them skills to actually learn and constructively think. We seem to think somehow that it's okay to pick on our teachers, and that culture needs to change. And I'm hoping with this new government and the direction we're seeing that we'll actually do that. Not only building schools, that's nice, but actually giving teachers the support they need in the classroom. Because frankly, one of the biggest costs to the education system, and one of the biggest costs to the society, is the fact that something towards 50% of teachers don't continue on after 5 years, because they're thrown into situations without the support they need, without the resources they need to deliver the curriculum that BC has, and it's just unwieldy. So we have survival of the fittest. Well, some of that's okay. But think of the investment that we have done as a society into training those teachers to get them to the position that they're delivering in the classroom. Look at any school district, the number of people who are on long-term disability because of the unwieldy conditions that they have to work in the lack of support they're given. These are costs to society. These are costs that we pay for. If we think of prevention, creating the environment that allows teachers to thrive, we actually save money in the long term. So I'm excited about where we're heading with teaching, and I hope to continue to push the government to ensure that it's not only about seismic upgrades, but it's also about giving teachers the resources they need in the classroom to deliver the curriculum. We've done remarkably well in the international PISA assessments, but we also have one of the highest rates of independent schools. Victoria used to have the highest rate of independent schools in the province. And, you know, we got to value our public education because that's our future. So let's hope that we continue down that area. The throne speech talks about public safety. It talks about important areas in mental health. It talks about a lot of issues in that regard. Again, my concern with the mental health focus in the throne speech, Honourable Speaker, is not the importance of health, of harm prevention, But the importance of where we need to actually invest is not only in stopping people from dying, but also to ensure that they're not there in the first place and that there's a pathway to recovery at the end. Anyone who's spoken to firefighters or first responders anywhere in British Columbia will know that it's not an uncommon story for a first responder to resuscitate the same person multiple times in a day, whether that person be in an emergency room, that person be a firefighter, a paramedic. That's a cost. Providing more access to naloxone sure will stop people from dying, but it actually doesn't deal with the problem. Why is it that people are there in the first place? To what extent are we dealing with the social problems in this province as a direct consequence of our K-12 system not having the access and resources that teachers needed at the early formative years of children to actually ensure that that society didn't have people aging out into these situations? To what extent would we have been avoiding this had we actually given children the resources they need at the first onsets of diagnosis? Good luck in British Columbia trying to get a child psychologist in a school district for your child. Those who have will go private, but those who are less fortunate have to wait and wait and wait and wait. And in many cases, early intervention would have led to savings in terms of outcomes down the road. And what about recovery? What about recovery? Housing first. It's good to see the move towards talking about enhanced recovery facilities, but also prevention, but it really needs to be our focus, and we continue to hope that government will move down in that regard. And to conclude, I'd like to deal with the issue of climate. You know, in 2012, after being asked 4 times and finally agreeing to run as an MLA with the BC Green Party, and let me tell you, and to my colleague Robert Stupka, who's running in Kelowna West, it is not the easiest pathway to the BC legislature to run with the BC Green Party, particularly when no one had been elected before. You got to work hard. But when I ran in 2012, I ran because I had spent years in universities teaching. I spent years talking about climate. People and students would ask me, what can I do? And I'd say there's 3 things you can do. Number 1 is you can use your wallet. Each and every one of us has a wallet. And we send a signal to the market by the way we spend. We buy more efficient products, more locally produced products. That's the direction market will head. We only have to look at the organic food sections in grocery stores. That was a direct response to societal demand. When I was a kid, you would have gone bankrupt if you had an organic food department in your grocery store because no one would want to pay it. But now people are willing to pay a little bit more, such that we're at a stage where the price difference is negligible between organic or non-organic. That's the power of the pocketbook. There's also the power of voting. We live in a democracy, and we have a system in place where we need to put this issue, if it's important to you, front and center in decision-making. That is why, with these, when I talk to students, I also put up the chart showing youth turnout in elections. Historically in BC, it was 30 to 40% of youth voting, and 70 to 80% of seniors over the age of 65. So cynically, you can see why people campaign on reducing hip and knee replacement lineups, because you know you're catering to an audience that will vote, and you can make a very real effect on their lives, such that 3 years later you can point to what you've done and say, look, I listened to you, I reduced those lineups, vote me back in. And you know 70 to 80% of seniors will vote. If you're someone with a vision, like the former premier of this province, Gordon Campbell, and you bring in place policy measures that you will never reap the benefits of yourself, because we know that socioeconomic inertia is such that the warming we have in store over the next couple of decades is a direct consequence of past decisions, and the decisions we make today will not actually affect those who make the decisions, but it'll affect the next generation and thereafter. When leaders like Gordon Campbell stand up and make that a priority, they need to be supported. And you need to vote people in who's to have that vision. And invariably, these students or in public lectures, people would say, oh, all these politicians, they're all the same. All they want to do is line their pockets, they're in it for power, they're all corrupt. And then you can say, and I did, well, if you don't like it, run yourself, because this is the system we got. And it's a lot better than anarchy, frankly, although some libertarian candidates may disagree. It's a lot better than anarchy. And I say, if you don't like run yourself, find someone to run. And then you can only do that, Honorable Speaker, for a few years before you really take a look in the mirror and say, really? Am I offering this advice? I'm no different from anyone else. Do as I say, not as I do. So in running with the BC Greens, and if anyone's interested, you can see it on we had a documentary film right for all of the campaign. I didn't think I was going to win. But for me, it was a matter of principle because I could not look my students or my children or frankly, my family in the face and continue to say one thing and then do another. When it came to see this throne speech, when it came to our discussions after the last election, you can rest assured that the reason why I was thrilled to actually agree to a confidence supply agreement with the BC NDP, and the reason why I am thrilled to see this in the throne speech, is that British Columbia is now repositioning itself to take advantage of not only the challenge, but the opportunities that arise from this challenge as we move towards the 21st century new economy in terms of diversifying it and moving to the clean, low-carbon economy. But again, I'm the first to say that I'm fed up, and my Indigenous friends have many centuries of this. I have a few decades. Fed up with words, what I want to see is action. And I look forward to working with this government in the months and years ahead as we actually develop a pathway that actually recognizes that dealing with climate change is the greatest economic opportunity British Columbia has ever had. And because of our strategic strengths, with the most beautiful place in the world to live, one of the best education systems in the world, and the ability to have access to access boundless energy, fuel, in terms of fiber, and water, that we can position ourselves to move ahead. So bring that in together with the Innovation Commission, the Emerging Economy Task Force. This is a really exciting time for British Columbia. Now, we can be very cynical here, and I get that it's, there's political games and people want to get in power, or we can recognize this is what it is. It's a minority government where almost I would say every member in this place ran because they wanted to make British Columbia a better place for all British Columbians. We can actually do that, and my commitment, Honourable Speaker, my caucus's commitment to both sides of this House, is we genuinely want to advance good public policy. We want to work with opposition and advance good amendments. We want to be given the courtesy of actually being able to have the time to reflect upon these amendments, rather than having them spring upon us on the floor and then, sending out tweets and press releases saying BC Greens side with MLA. That's politics. People in British Columbia are sick of that. They want us to work together. Whatever happens tonight in Kelowna, I look forward to working with the winner, whether that winner is Ben West, whether that winner is Shelley Cook, whether that winner is Robert Stupka, I'm getting tired, or whether that, wouldn't it be interesting, whether that self-described pit bull is the BC Conservative Party candidate in that riding. We'd like to work with all of them, and this place will be much the better for it if we do. So with that, Honourable Speaker, I'm delighted to stand in support of the throne speech. I look forward to fulfilling the goals and met in the throne speech, and I look forward to seeing over the weeks ahead the details emerge as we debate budget and then the bills that accompany it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member.